All right, so welcome back to another deep dive.
Yeah.
You know how this works. We dig into some fascinating stuff.
We do.
And this time, I think this one is going to hit home for a lot of people.
I think so, yeah.
We're talking about logic or, well...
the lack thereof.
Yeah, why do some people just seem to completely, miss the logic boat?
You know, you see it all the time. It's like, are we even speaking the same language?
Exactly. And it's like, you want to shake them and be like, hello, logic. Anyone home?
Especially when it's something that logically would benefit them. It's like, come on.
Yeah, it's not just about being right or wrong. It's about how you get there.
Absolutely.
So to get to the bottom of this, we've got some interesting sources. A bit from Wikipedia on, the whole concept of logic.
Right.
Plus some other articles that talk about, how authority figures can really mess with our thinking.
Oh, yeah. That's a whole other can of worms.
Big time.
Authority and logic. Do they mix? That's the question.
Sometimes I wonder. But listen, by the end of this deep dive, you might not win every argument.
True.
But you'll at least understand why you're banging your head against the wall.
Exactly. It's all about understanding the different ways that logic, or the lack of it, plays out in our lives.
All right, so before we go too far, let's back up a bit. What is logic, really? I get the basic idea, but I'm sure there's more to it.
Yeah, you're right. It's more than just common sense. Wikipedia defines logic as a way to figure out what's true, not by just going with your gut, but by really looking at the arguments and evidence.
Okay, so it's like a process, like a way of thinking.
Absolutely. It's about the how, not just the what. It's the reasoning, the journey, not just the destination.
So you could be right about something, but if you didn't get there logically, it doesn't really count.
In a way, yes. It's like building a house on a shaky foundation. No matter how pretty it looks, it's going to collapse eventually.
So logic is the foundation. Got it. Now, what are some of the building blocks of this foundation? What are the key components of logic?
Well, one of the most basic is the relationship between a premise and a conclusion.
Okay, premise, conclusion.
Premise is like your starting point, the evidence, the facts, and the conclusion is what you figure out logically from that evidence.
Okay, I'm with you. But what about when the logic goes haywire? When people just don't make sense? How do we spot those bad arguments?
That's where logical consistency comes in. All your premises, all your arguments, they have to fit together, They can't contradict each other.
So it's got to be airtight. I can't say, I love freedom of speech, but only if everyone agrees with me.
Exactly. That's a perfect example of an inconsistency. You can't have it both ways.
Right, like saying, I'm all for choice, but you have to pick this one. It just doesn't fly.
Nope, the logic breaks down right there. And you know what gets really interesting?
What's that?
Is when you throw authority into the mix.
Uh-oh. That's where things get messy, right?
Because suddenly, even if the logic is crystal clear, people might cling to beliefs that don't make sense, even for them. And our sources suggest that this has a lot to do with how we view those in charge, those authority figures.
Yeah, we've all seen it. People blindly following orders, defending the indefensible.
It's like, is it fear? Blind faith? What's going on there?
That's what I want to unpack. Why do some people just seem to abandon logic when authority comes into play?
And the examples in these sources really highlight how this plays out in the real world. In systems where there's a lot of centralized power, people might not even realize that their choices are being limited.
Limited how? Give me an example. Help me wrap my head around this.
Think about it. Imagine strict economic controls. You can only have certain jobs, start certain businesses, if you fit into a very specific box.
So it's not that someone is stopping you directly, but the options are so narrow that you might not even see the walls closing in.
Exactly. And if you're constantly obeying, constantly following those limited paths, you become less aware of those limitations.
It's like being a horse with blinders on. You can only see straight ahead.
That's a great analogy. And there's actually a psychological term for this. Learned helplessness.
Learned helplessness. That sounds intense. What does that even mean?
Basically, if you're always in situations where you have zero control, you just eventually give up trying.
Oh, wow. I see. It's like your brain says, why bother? It's not going to change anything.
Right. One of the sources used this really powerful example. They talked about how people in North Korea often blame their problems on things like outside forces or natural disasters.
Instead of, the government.
Exactly. Because they've been conditioned to see the world in a way that protects the existing power structure.
Wow. So it's like their ability to even question the situation has been, disabled.
In a way, yes. And this isn't just about North Korea. This can happen anywhere. There's a tight grip on information.
Right, like in China with their internet censorship.
Oh, yeah, the Great Firewall. That's a whole other level of information control.
Big time. So if you only hear one narrative, one version of the truth, how can you even begin to see the inconsistencies?
It becomes almost impossible. It's like living in an echo chamber where all you hear is your own voice bouncing back.
But here's what's been bugging me. If someone is stuck in that cycle, limited logic, blind obedience, can you bring them back?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Can you use logic to help them see those contradictions?
I mean, I've tried. Sometimes it feels like, I don't know, talking to a brick wall. Like logic just bounces right off.
Yeah, I feel you. It's a challenge. But the sources did mention something about asking the right question.
Oh, that's interesting. So maybe there's hope. Maybe you can nudge them in the right direction.
Maybe. We'll have to dive into that. So you're saying you really think you can use logic to, like, pull someone out of that echo chamber?
It's tough. You know, I've had those conversations where I'm like laying out the facts, the evidence, the pure logic of it all. It's like talking to a wall sometimes.
Yeah, I get it.
No matter how much logic you throw at them, they don't budge.
It's interesting, though, because the sources we're looking at, they suggest it might not always be about a lack of logic.
Wait, what? So they're not illogical. They just choose to ignore the logic.
Well, it's more like what they're prioritizing.
Okay, so they're logically choosing to prioritize something else over logic. That's a bit of a mind bender.
Think about it. A lot of these situations where logic seems to vanish, emotions are running high.
Oh, yeah, for sure. People get heated. They dig in their heels.
They might be clinging to a sense of security, a feeling of belonging to a group.
Or just, like, not wanting to be wrong.
Exactly. It's easier to stick with what's familiar, even if it's not logical, than to face that discomfort of changing your mind.
Oh, yeah, I've been there. Cognitive dissonance, right? When your brain is like, nope, can't deal with this conflicting information.
Bingo. And one of the sources talked about how, especially in closed systems where info is tightly controlled, people often see authority as a protector.
Okay, so even if the system's messed up, they'd rather stick with it because it feels safer than the unknown.
Right. It's like they're afraid of what might happen if that protection goes away.
Makes sense. But what about propaganda? You'd think people would see through those lies, the manipulation.
Well, propaganda is sneaky. It preys on our fears, our insecurities.
Oh, yeah, like fear-mongering.
Exactly. The sources use this example of portraying the outside world as dangerous, hostile.
So even if things are bad on the inside, it still seems better than the scary unknown outside.
Right. The fear becomes its own kind of twisted logic.
So they're not being illogical, they're being logically afraid. Man, this is deep.
It distorts how they see reality.
They end up defending a system that's not good for them.
And the more they fear the outside world, the more they cling to that authority figure who claims to protect them from it.
Okay, I get it. But I still struggle with the idea that everyone's just a victim of their circumstances. Isn't there some personal responsibility here? Like, shouldn't people be able to step back, think critically?
It's a valid point. Not everyone falls for the same tricks. Some people are naturally more skeptical, more willing to question authority.
Right, some people are just wired to think for themselves.
But remember, these systems are designed to squash critical thinking.
Good point. They make it hard to even realize you're being manipulated.
Exactly. But I'm still holding on to hope here. The sources did say that asking the right questions can sometimes get those critical thinking gears turning.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So maybe there is a way to, I don't know, crack the code.
It's worth a shot, and logic can be a useful tool here.
But not in a, like, confrontational way.
No, not like, I'm right, you're wrong. More like guiding them to see the holes in their own beliefs.
So, like, leading them to that aha moment on their own.
Exactly. The sources emphasize asking open-ended questions, ones that encourage them to think for themselves.
Like, what makes you believe that? Or, have you considered this other perspective?
That's the idea. Instead of just giving them the answers, make them curious.
I like that. It's not about force-feeding them logic. It's about planting a seed.
A seed of doubt.
It makes them question their own assumptions.
You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But you can make it thirsty.
Haha, love that. So maybe, just maybe, sparking that thirst for knowledge, for truth, that's how we chip away at those illogical walls. You're starting to win me over here, you know? But it still feels like a long shot, especially when people are so entrenched in their beliefs.
It's not easy, that's for sure. But the sources did point to some historical examples where systems of control, of manipulation, they crumbled because they just couldn't hold up against their own contradictions.
So logic wins in the end, even if it takes a while.
I'd like to think so. But it takes patience, persistence, and a willingness to keep talking even when it's frustrating.
Okay, I'm on board. I could drink to that.
Speaking of drinks,
You thinking what I'm thinking?
Maybe it's time to wrap this up and head over to Mickytolife for some research.
For science, those drink reviews aren't going to watch themselves.
Exactly. For science.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah, we have.
Logic, authority, echo chambers, the whole shebang.
It's been a wild ride.
It has. But before we go and, do some field research on Mickytolife.
Purely for science, of course.
Of course, always for science.
Always.
Let's recap. What are the big takeaways from all of this? What have we learned about why some people just don't seem to, use logic?
I think one of the biggest things is realizing that logic, while important, it's not the only thing driving our decisions. We're not just robots running on pure logic.
Totally. We're humans. We've got emotions.
Exactly. Emotions play a huge role in how we see the world, what we believe.
Yeah, we all like to think we're super rational.
Right.
But then someone cuts you off in traffic and suddenly...
road rage.
Yeah, all logic goes out the window.
All logic is gone. So recognizing that we're all susceptible to emotions, to letting those feelings influence our thinking, that's a big first step.
It's like, be aware of your own biases,
Mm-hmm.
And then you can start to understand why other people might hold beliefs that seem, illogical to you.
Absolutely. It's about understanding, not judging.
Right, not judging. So understanding is key. And then what? What's the next step after that?
Well, that brings us to critical thinking, which is crucial.
Okay, critical thinking, it's not just about, being smart.
No, it's about questioning your assumptions, looking at the evidence, being open to different viewpoints.
So, constantly checking yourself, making sure you're not falling for bad logic or manipulation.
Exactly. And the sources we've been digging into, they had some great advice on how to boost those critical thinking skills. Like asking those open-ended questions.
Oh, yeah, we talked about that.
Making an effort to see things from different perspectives. Even having those, respectful debates with people who see things differently.
Right. Because it's not about winning an argument. It's about, getting closer to the truth, even if it's messy.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And even if you can't, magically wake someone up, just having those thoughtful conversations can be valuable in itself.
It might not sprout immediately, but you've at least, created the possibility.
Exactly. You never know what impact you might have down the road.
So true. All right, folks, I think we've officially reached peak logic for one episode.
We've logicked ourselves out.
Yeah, our brains are fried.
Time for a drink.
But before we go and check out Mickytolife for some vital drink research...
Important work. Gotta stay hydrated.
We want to leave you with one last thought to chew on.
Okay, hit us with it.
If logic isn't always the key to changing minds, then what is? What are the best ways to, bridge those divides, challenge those deep-seated beliefs, and make the world a more, logical place? Let us know what you think in the comments. And until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those glasses full.
Right.